Welcome all to the last session. Let me just quickly share screen with the agenda of this session. So, as you might know, this is the last 14th session of the Global Imagine 4.7 event organized by Bridge 47 and our members and event partners. And thank you all for staying with us. It's been a long 3 days, so thank you for persisting and keeping up with us. In this session, we will hear from Helena Siren Gualinga. We're very, very happy to have you here and talk with her about her experiences as young indigenous, environmental and human rights activists from the Quechua Sarayaco community in Pastaza, Ecuador. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing in advance. Following that, my wonderful colleague Sonia will make us dream in an appropriately for this event, an imagination exercise, followed by a little break. And after the break, grounded and ready for debating, we will hear 3 provocations from excellent 3 speakers. Robbie Guevara from International Council for Adult Education, Karen Peshby from the Manchester Metropolitan University, and Manish Jain from Shikshantar Institute and Swaraj University. In the last part, for the last 45 minutes or so, we are planning to kick off a fishbowl on the role that global citizenship education and transformative learning in general can play to really build a strong civil society, so civil society in general. We hope to have an exciting and lively debate for the end. Hope your energy levels are up and we count on your support. We've never done the fishbowl in the online format before, so brace yourselves. All right, without taking much more time, I would love to give a warm welcome to Helena and her speech. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you everyone who's joining. I see some people are still dropping in. My name is Helena Gualinga. I'm 19, and as Alan said, I come from an indigenous community in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I actually have a Finnish father, so my mother is from the Sarayaco community. When I was very young, my community, which is deep down in the forest, in the Amazon, had oil companies coming to it without our consent. And this eventually turned into a, well, not eventually, it directly turned into a very violent entering from both the government's part, from the oil company's part, and then they were accompanied also by military. And this due to that my community did not consent to the oil company operating on our lands. This started this 10-year process of lawsuits of our community members having to literally go out to the forest to keep our borders safe from military or the company workers that could come there and hurt our people. And this is a very common situation, I would say, in the Amazon and for a lot of indigenous communities, that there are companies or people from the outside, as we call them, coming to our community and not really having a dialogue with us, just coming there and telling us kind of, okay, this is what we're doing here and you have to agree to it. And my community is a community of 1,200 people who were having, I'd say, one of the biggest powers in the entire country and in the entire region up against them. The government, accompanied by the military, and the oil company, which is one of the most, it's the biggest economic resource in Ecuador. So this was a very, very hard fight for my people. But during this long process, we learned a lot. We went through a lot. Our community members were threatened. They had threats made to their lives. I personally know people that were attacked. But during all this, during all the hardship, we still learned that there are ways to actually stop these powers. And one of the things that were very, very important were creating alliances. It was creating alliances with other communities, with other people that were going through the same things. It was creating alliances that went past national borders. It was creating alliances with NGOs, with different interest groups. But it was also communication. Communication was one of the key tools in this, because when my community, after a 10-year-long battle, actually took this to an international court, everything and all the atrocities that occurred when the oil company entered our community were actually recorded, because there was this young man who was studying filmmaking. So he had a very, very cheap camera, a very, very old one that he got as a present from someone. And he recorded everything. So everything was on tape, on camera. And this made us realize how important communication is, how important it is to record, how important it is to document, and to transmit what has been documented. Right now, I am 19. I'm currently living in Finland, about to graduate in a week. And the reason why I am here, why I'm not back in my community where I actually grew up, is because of education. I had to get an education, and that unfortunately was not provided in my community. And during these years, as I told you, communication was one of the greatest tools that we had when this was happening. I've been starting to get involved in the process that my community was in. And when I was a little bit younger, maybe 13, 12 years old, I realized also what an opportunity and what a privilege I had to be able to receive this quality education in Finland, having access to tools as social media, as a phone, and realized what a benefit that could be to my community. So I started out creating small posts. My English wasn't that good back then. My Spanish wasn't that good back then, because we speak our own native language. And I started making all these posts about atrocities happening to other communities, things happening in our own community, but not only focusing on the negative things that were happening to us, but also promoting our cultural existence, everything that was positive about our community, everything that our community actually was doing while standing up against oil companies, like protecting hectares and hectares of untouched forest in the middle of the Amazon. And this would not have been possible. Those forests would not have been there if my community wasn't there. So I started doing this, and until now I have quite a big following, which is really cool to see that people actually are interested and people actually are engaged. But one of the things that are really a concern in our community right now, after that we were able to beat the oil company, after we actually were able to win them in an international court, we still have issues, and we still have great concerns. And one of these concerns is education, because when the oil company entered, we realized that, okay, we have had this very traditional way of living, which is we still want to continue doing that. We still want to continue having that. But how do we keep having that life without being interrupted by these huge powers coming against us? So we understood that one of the key things that we need to focus on in our community is education, because education it's so fundamental to be able to protect our own lands and our own community, our own bodies, but it's also to be able to it's to be able to develop our own community, to thrive as a community. And you know, in these times, that is really important, that we're able to develop as a community. So when I don't remember the exact year, but I remember this was like when I was a child and when like my like older siblings were children. My community started this school that was called Tayagwasi. And this school was actually completely created by the community to be able to focus on both ancestral knowledges and the Western science education system. Because it's really important to understand here that we speak a different language. We do not speak Spanish in our community, we speak Quechua. We have no roads there. The only way of transportation to our community is by canoe, a 5-hour long ride with a canoe, or by taking an airplane. So this is completely, you know, remote. It's completely disconnected from the rest of the world geographically, and we have this completely different lifestyle where our life is based on hunting, fishing, and growing our own food. The rhythm of life is completely different. So we needed to create this education system that actually benefited us and was adequate to our way of living. But in 2008, the government interrupted the building of the school and the system that we already were developing and that was growing by creating this new education system and shutting down our little school in the community. I was having this conversation with someone, I don't actually remember who it was, but we were talking about how little investment there is in education or just in general in Indigenous communities. And then this person told me, well, there was this something $1 million investment in school buildings for Indigenous people. And this was actually like $500 million and the $500 investment in infrastructure for schools in the Amazon. And that may sound great because, you know, wow, like people are actually caring about education in the Amazon and for Indigenous people. Well, the issue here is that that infrastructure, well, first of all, it was all covered in corruption, the entire project. But even though there was all these buildings made, there were huge cement buildings in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the Amazon, where we are used to having small huts. We live in small huts created by bamboo and some palms, because that is the way that we live. That is how we have been living for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you know, before even the West, we had contact with the Western world, our school was the forest and our teachers were our parents or our community members. And now they tried to impose this entire new system where, you know, it completely, there's this collide with our way of living, you know, people, the children that used to go with their father or mother into the forest can no longer do that because they need to go to school. So there is this interruption with the way that we live and with the way and the access to education or going to a school. So you either have to choose, okay, should I learn from going to school, or should I learn from how to live in the forest and all the knowledges that we have, that, you know, all the knowledges that we have when it comes to plants, when it comes to the animals, when it comes to taking care of the forest. So all this investment in education in the Amazon and to Indigenous people was actually just fake, because that is not working anymore. past more than 10 years, and the education system is actually getting worse and worse in indigenous and rural communities. So what is actually needed, and I get this a lot, okay, so you're 19, you've studied in Finland, like what do we need to do? And the thing is, it's scary how simple it is to actually create a working school system, because we already have this knowledge in our communities of how to do that and how to combine Western science with what we already know in our community, and how we can implement that in a system that works for us. For example, in the community that we were building, which was called Tayaguasi, every Friday, the children went out to the forest to look for palms, to look for like soils to do pottery, and all these things that the children did that were completely normal to do with their parents that did in school. But eventually that was forbidden by the government because they wanted to implement this or impose this new system on us. I think when it comes to education systems, we don't really think about that, wow, like Finland has a great education system. I have been able to take part of that, but this system would never, ever, ever work in my community because it's not right. It's made for the people that live in Finland, and it's made for the people that have grown up with this culture and with this lifestyle. If we take that to the Amazon, even though it's probably one of the best education systems in the world, it would simply not work. So basically what is needed is, yes, we need investment in education in indigenous and rural communities, and we need investment to be able to create plans and a system that actually works. But it also needs to be, accordingly to our people and the knowledges that we already have. So yeah, that is probably one of like the most important things to me, but also just like in general to like be able to transmit everything that is going on in the Amazon. I think I know I think I passed the limit for a few minutes. I'm just gonna add this, but yes, like right now, one of the key things I spoke about was education, but everything is actually interconnected. The fight against the environmental destruction with social justice, with education, with healthcare, and a lot of times my name is kind of put into one box and be like, okay, this is what Helena stands for, but it's actually so interconnected. Because every single part of this affects the other one. So when it comes to, climate change or, our environment being destroyed, it also affects education. Like just a few months back, there were these huge floods in our community that destroyed all the small huts. They had to be rebuilt by our own community members a few months later. So like all these things are interconnected. There's not just one thing that we can talk about. There's not just one perspective we can look at this from. And I think, all this is just goes back to protecting our forests and protecting the land. And then it goes back to protecting the biodiversity, the environment, the climate. And I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with the importance of the Amazon for the entire world, and one of the basic things that we can do to actually get to that, or to keep protecting the Amazon and everything it does for this planet, is actually to protect indigenous people that actually are protecting the Amazon. It goes on like that. But yeah, I think I've passed my few minutes a little bit, but thank you so much for listening and for having me all here.
No worries, Helena. We are intrigued to hear more from you. And I know we are short on time, but of course we still have a couple of more minutes to get to know more about your experience. And first of all, I would like to start with saying thank you. Thank you for sharing everything you have experienced in your very, very young age already. And thanks for showing us what impact global developments have on you, on the individual, and on communities like the one in the Amazon. So, and you showed very well what kind of relevance had on education had on your journey for you as well as for your community. And thanks also for sharing with us the initiatives you've taken in this regard. And well, I've opened the floor for questions already in the chat, and I can see a second question is coming in now. Oh, a third, but we will start with one Virba has already posted during your input, and please continue. We have about 10 minutes for responding. So Virba, he lives, I hope it's he's living in Western Cameroon in a conflict area where there is conflict between government military forces and separatist fighters. So education is, well, an issue of, especially for children, and human rights abuses are done from both sides. So Helena, he asks, what advices will you give in soliciting for possible partnerships and which fundings can be made with increasing humanitarian needs?
Wow, that's a huge question. I think these are very very complicated subjects, but it's definitely worth reaching out to NGOs that already are working in that region, or even larger networks that are interested in education, that are interested in the development and the rights of children. I think I mean, we're struggling basically with the same things in the Amazon, especially when it comes to funding, because obviously there is no governmental funding. But I think it's worth a shot to reach out to every possible ally. I think that is very, very important, to not shut down any closed before it's actually closed, and before any doors before it's actually closed. So yeah, I think, you know, looking for allies it's one of the first steps that we can do.
Thank you. Yes, underlining the importance of not forgetting about allies. Natalia asked, or she said that you mentioned that a solution that works in the context of Finland will not work in other communities, like in the Amazon. So every context and space is different and the needs are different. What can we do to make sure we find solutions that are tailored to the needs of specific communities, but also contain global partnerships? What do you think, Helena?
I think those are, you know, those go hand in hand with each other, which makes it also easier. But currently there is a need for funding. There is a need for creating these systems, and yes, like a lot of people like be like, oh no, like we cannot talk about funding because that is a sensitive issue or a sensitive subject. But to be honest, like that is one of the key things that are needed right now. To be able to develop, to be able to do research, to actually create something that is stable from the beginning, because there was this they tried to do this kind of intercultural system in Ecuador, but they tried to kind of adapt it to our rural and indigenous communities, but this was still made by people that had never set foot in the Amazon. Like they were somewhere in the Ecuadorian capital creating this new plan, and they had never even been to a community, or never, you know, seen what a day looks like for a child in an indigenous community. So I think that is super important, to actually work with the people that are going to receive this education.
Mm-hmm. Really involve the people that are concerned. It is
Yes.
for, yes. Nora asks, or well, she understands you as an active on climate and a climate activist. How do you think the dominating education system has contributed or even harmed the climate struggle?
I think that is that's a fair question. And well, first of all, I think there is, at least a few years ago, there was very little information and very little education about climate change, even in schools and even in, grade schools, which is, I think, why a lot of people until now have underestimated the crisis, because even though the information was there, it was never provided to people. And now that youth actually are realizing this is a huge issue, actually finding out on their own, we're coming up to this, we're like having this awakening of like, wow, like something needs to be done, because the science is not, it's not something new. It's been there for I don't know how many years, but it's been there. But I also think like we have this, not just, I think our education system is also based on the worldview that we have, which is, for example, human rights or economic gain goes before human rights, or the environment or the climate. And that is the worldview that we've had. Human has like been kind of put themselves before everything else, and not, instead of trying to create this balance and create this sustainable way of living. And I think it really comes back to like the worldview that we have. I mean, in our indigenous communities, we talk about that we do not see the forest or the ecosystems as something opposite to us. We see ourselves part of it. And I think that is also, that also explains why indigenous people have this very, very close relationship to our ecosystems, to nature. And then when we go back to education and the education system that we have in most Western countries, that system is actually based on this other worldview that is kind of built up on exploitation of lands and all these things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Helena. And I hope, and I guess this also answers Rijal's question. He also asks about the connection of education to preserve the environment in a context which is supposedly more advanced and more educated than other areas. That's why, Rijal, I hope it's okay for you, and also with an eye on the time, I want to move to Hamyan's question. He wants to know, Helena, if you know any examples of development of indigenous relevant education systems along the lines you outlined.
Yes, there are actually some communities, I think in Bolivia, that have had pretty successful systems developed, and they have had very, very, they've been able to preserve both their ancestral knowledge, and they've been able to develop very highly academically. And there are some small examples in different parts of the world, which shows us that it is possible. But these are not systems that have gotten support and that have not been able to grow into to spread to other communities. Because even though if we're able to build one school in the Amazon for the children in my community, we're 1,200 people, and I think the school has like 20-30 children going to it, or maybe even less. Yes, that education is going to be very, very important for these children, but we will still have hundreds of communities around us that do not have that system. So when we do find this solution, when we are able to create this new education system that we are trying to do in our own community, one of the things that will be hard too is to actually share them with other communities. And, there is this entire legal process, obviously, kind of stopping us, because to have a school for the grades to be recognized by the state, there is this entire process. They did not want to do that with the old school, you know, like there are all these kind of all these, I don't know, like they're just like trying to like shut this down the entire time, and which is really sad. But yeah, I think there's still a lot to do and a lot to work on. And just something that I wanted to add to the previous question, I think it's also we need to kind of reshape the word development, and or how we understand the word development. Because if you ask me, or if you ask 6-year-old me, who has not lived in Finland and who has not seen the things that I have seen after all these years, the word development would mean that the oil company came to our community and that my house would be gone, and that my community would be gone. The rivers would be polluted all with oil spills. That 6-year-old me would have said that to you. Me today understand developments differently, but because we need to understand development differently, because development is to preserve my community, you know. So we have this two opposite views of what development is, and that's what we need to redefine also.
Thank you so much, Helena. This is just a perfect closing sentence, closing plea actually for us also to redefine what development actually means to all of us. Unfortunately, our half an hour has passed by way too quickly, but thanks, Helena, for joining us, especially. Actually, I wanted to congratulate you to your graduation. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All the success on your further way. And I now will, by the way, also would like to highlight that we have graphically recorded what Helena has said and what has Helena shared with all of us. Thank you so much again. And now I would like to hand over to my colleague Sonia, who already has a forest background. It's kind of like a connection between the Amazon and Sonia's session. Yeah, Sonia, please bring us to the forest.
Thank you, Ricarda. This is the lovely Danish birch forest as it looks like at the moment. We all enjoy it very much. We even eat from the leaves. I invite you all to join a short exercise. It will last approximately 10 minutes. Please take a moment to make yourself as comfortably as you can. Or maybe you want to lie down. You can use any props you have available to support your body right now. I invite you to close your eyes, to bring your awareness to the spaces between your body and the surface beneath you. Notice how the space between your body and the surface beneath you is becoming smaller and smaller. Now feel how your body is starting to becoming softer and ready to rest. Surrender into relaxation. We will now begin a rotation of awareness. All you have to do is allow your awareness to follow my voice as I guide you from point to point within your body. Move your awareness to your heels resting on the surface, your foot resting on the surface, the calves, your knees, your thighs, and your hips. Feel your lower back, middle back, and your upper back. Feel your hands, wrists, forearms, elbows, upper arms, and shoulders. Feel your neck, the back of your head. Feel all points of contact with the earth. Move your awareness to your breath. Follow the gentle tide of your breath without altering it. Just watch your breath. Imagine that each breath is a ray of light flowing up from the depths inside of you and out into the world. With each inhale, you send more lights out into the world. Watch the ray of lights you send out. See how the world lightens up. Imagine that all the lights open to the nature. Now imagine that you are standing in the nature. You feel your bare feet on the ground. You are surrounded by a lush forest. You can feel the sun shining on your body. You can hear bees humming and birds singing. You can smell the wild flowers and the green grass. In the distance, you see a path leading into the forest. You walk toward the path and step into the forest. Once inside the forest, your eyes adjust to the shade of the trees. The path continues in front of you and winds easily up the hillside. Sunlight shines through the trees, birds singing in the distance. You continue on the path as it climbs steadily uphill. Near the top of the hill, you see a small opening in the side of the mountain. This opening is a cave. You feel drawn to the cave and walk towards it. Within the cave, you see another opening. You walk towards that other opening, and you see a green valley before you. You realize you've stumbled into a breathtaking new futuristic society. There's a beautiful scenery below you with children, animals, trees, women, men, and plants. You sit down in the opening and watch. A sense of calm washes over you. You feel at peace with all that is. You feel relaxed and calm. Notice the beauty around you. Notice the beauty inside you. Gently notice your body against the surface again. Become aware of your breath. Without opening your eyes, become aware of your surroundings. When you feel ready, stretch your arms long overhead and extend your legs and open your eyes. The exercise is over. Thank you. Now we invite you to take a small break or a reflection. Stand up, walk around, take a sip of water if you need it. Remember what you have been, or reflect upon what you have been experiences in the exercise, and come back in. Was it, Alan, 5 minutes? I have forgotten.
Yes, 5 minutes
Yes,
is good.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. See you in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome again back to the Bridge 47 global event. This is almost the last session what we are now starting, and really looking forward for this session too. So hopefully you have enjoyed all the earlier versions and all the earlier settings or discussions or whatever the format has been. And like you have noticed that we have changed a little bit on this content and the ways of working as well, but I do hope that it has been very, very much inspired about that. So just to move on for this last session, so I'm the chair and the founder of the Bridge 47 and happy to moderate this last piece so far on that, and this is going to be the Fishbowl. So we are coming a little bit from the sky to the water mental level, and if I could ask, I think we will have a little bit guidance. I think many of you know pretty well what the Fishbowl is, but at least for me this is the first time to do that in digital way. We are normally do that in the places where we are, and like you can see the picture here, for example, that has been the normal way how we do that, but let's try to do that together in a digital way together as well. So except the Fishbowl, it's the conversation, and it's definitely driven by the participants. So this is really the invitation for all of you to think about it if you want and when you want to participate. So this is the kind of invitation for that. We are starting with a couple of colleagues who are making some kind of provocations to warm up a little bit on the discussions. And it works in that way that those first ones are coming to be some kind of inner circle discussion. And then when you feel that you would like to comment, you're most welcome to join and give your thoughts about that provocation, what the colleagues will share first. And that's the point, is really the ongoing dialogue and the discussions. So that is the point. But because we have the limited time, I'm really inviting all of you to try to be as precise as possible, so that in this time frame what we are having, around 45 minutes, we can get as many as possible persons to join in on this. So I'm really begging you to really just keep your interventions in a couple of minutes, so that we will do that in that format. But I think that you know that very well, and if you not, you will learn that very, very quickly. And now we have a little bit. Okay, that's the right. Is it the right slide now on the screen? But let's move on. And I'm really too happy to kick off this Fishbowl with my dear friend Robbie Guevara, who exactly is the very, very committed popular educator with very extensive experience in education for sustainable development, environmental education, global citizenship education, especially in Asian and South Pacific regions. And then, by the way, he is one of the founders of the Bridge 47. We will tell you that next time when we're meeting somewhere over the beers and etc. about this story. It's really, really fascinating. But anyway, that's for the future. But Robbie is at the moment the president of the International Council of Adult Education. And now I would like to invite Robbie, you to be the first one to make your provocations in a couple of minutes. So over to you, Robbie.
Okay, you want me to speak for a couple of minutes?
Indeed, and I know that that's a challenge, but anyway, right.
Okay, a couple of minutes just to acknowledge again. I thank you really for the invitation and acknowledge that I speak from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Australia as a settler migrant myself. And so I think that's my starting point, that for us, the focus of transformative education actually begins by a recognition of our own transformation. There can never be a transformation if we only look at transformation of as a project of the other. And so I really resonated with Helena's presentation earlier that talked about this whole notion of understanding indigenous worldviews. Because as a young environmental educator in the Philippines who graduated with an environmental science degree, I thought I was going to bring science to the people. And what I thought when starting to engage our environmental awareness to action programs, I was confronted by a question of an indigenous leader when I started to talk about the environment as being made up of living and non-living things. And then he said, so what's non-living? And I caught myself and realized, oops, it was my science speaking. It was my science trying to explain the environment to them from my perspective. But I also had to recognize and tell them that it is this science that will be used to make decisions about applications for geothermal plants in sacred mountains. It is this science that will also be used to suppress the kind of relationship they have, the spiritual connections. Not to say that it's not important. So I guess from my perspective as an environmental educator, it is this whole idea that we had good intentions to transform, okay? And we think that the way to transform is also based on our own narrow, limited lenses. And so my call and my provocation is for us to start to see how we need to also be transformed. And this transformation, I think, as Helena says, is about a relationship with the people we want to be able to work with. So there's no such thing that we will transform them to be able to save the environment or save the world. No, the transformation is a reciprocal process. And as you said, it's a dialogical and relational process. And this is the kind of learning I think we all aspire to achieve.
Thank you, Robbie. You made it. Excellent points and in time. Well done, both sides. Thanks a lot for that. So that was really, and stay with us here. So I'm going to invite now the next provocator. Let's put it in that way. Again, Karen, very dear friend of us as well. Karen Pashby, she's the reader of in the Manchester Metropolitan University at the moment, where she co-leads the Education and Global Futures Research Group and teaches under and postgraduate students. And of course, Karen has a quite very exciting career in many roles as well. But perhaps the point to underline here is that the key focus of her work is supporting and resourcing critically reflective practice in Global North context that bridges GCE, environmental and sustainable education, and also about the anti-racist pedagogy. So Karen, how you provocate us?
And I was told I had 5 to 7 minutes, but I promise, because I prepared it, it's on time, but that was the time I was given. Oh dear. I also had something to share with you, but it looks like I've just host. Are you able to enable me to share screen? If not, I'll have to read. I had some really nice pictures for us.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. There it is. Okay, great. All right, can we see it?
Yep, now we see it, yeah.
Oh, of course, it's gone to the end. Okay. According to the Envision 4.7 roadmap, transformative education fosters engaged, active, and critical learners. It's situated in and responsive to local contexts. It requires both learning and unlearning. And the roadmap states that to effectively achieve 4.7, past and ongoing successes and failures must be learned from. To offer a glimpse at what transformative learning has meant for me in my context, I offer 3 quick snapshots, 1 personal and 2 from my professional experiences about the role CSOs can play in formal education. The Pashbys immigrated from Yorkshire, England to what is now called Canada in the early 1800s. I can assume it was because of very challenging conditions in the north of England at the time. 2 Pashbys died in Montreal not long after arriving. They eventually set up as butchers in Toronto. Several generations later, my grandfather was the first to go to university, and he was able to buy a piece of land on the beaches of the Great Lakes with a friend and build a cabin there. It's the place I feel the most secure in the world and the most connected to generations and to the interdependent spirits of humans and what my language calls nature. But all that hard work of my ancestors and the ability to own land happened alongside and complicit with highly unethical policies around Indigenous land, the cultural genocide of First Nations, Inuit, Métis people through residential schooling, and racist immigration policies that continue manifestations of inequalities today. What are we doing today that generations from now will look back at and shake their heads? What are the ethical questions that are pushed back that need to be centered? And how do we account for power and privileges that we have? Snapshot 2. A high school in Toronto promotes a global learning initiative that supports an NGO raising money and awareness for projects aimed at poverty reduction in African contexts. Students at this school have immigrated from various diverse places, including different regions within sub-Saharan Africa. Some of them complain about the posters. I think we can imagine what they look like around the school, suggesting that they make it look like anyone from Africa has had the same impoverished experience. They feel othered, they say. The teachers stop doing global learning. How can privilege, including white innocence and/or European exceptionality, get recentered in our work? What resources can we create together to be able to respond when it turns out something we think is helping is actually reinforcing the problem? Snapshot 3, a classroom in Finland is piloting a teacher resource that centers on ethical complexities, and I'm observing. The topic is climate change. A group of boys are struggling with the idea of looking at different perspectives. They're convinced that the main problems, and responsibilities lie in the so-called developing countries. The teacher reminds them of a news scan activity they did recently that showed how little information they get about climate change that's not just about Finland. She directs them to a blog put together by a CSO, where different individuals from around the world share their work against climate change. One of the students gets visibly frustrated. He says he used to know what to say about who is responsible for the problem, but now he sees that, like in Finland, the person in Nigeria whose blog he's reading is also working with renewable energy technologies. The teacher feels this is an aha moment. The student realized when he hadn't known enough and challenged his assumptions. A CSO provided a resource. How can we center unlearning as an ethical practice and ethical pedagogy in formal and non-formal spaces across the lifespan? How can we resource this work together? Stefania Giannani reminded us that transformative education sets new ethical frontiers. This morning, Lisa John said transformative learning requires us to review and challenge our core assumptions on a regular basis and to be really open to our own ignorance as a way of engaging with others. In yesterday's keynote, Chief Ninawa Hunikui stated that to heal our thinking, we must learn that we cannot understand everything. A healing education starts with a confrontation with what humanity has done wrong in the past. And I would add, generations ago, but also 1 minute ago. And it is here, he said, that we have the possibility of contributing something new and healthier for the next generations. At the Envision 4.7 event, my mentor, Lynette Schultz, raised the question of how in the European context, we will take up our responsibilities to Indigenous struggles. And so a concrete question for CSOs in European contexts, building from Helen's talk just now, we speak a lot about using, for example, the UN Charter of Human Rights and the rights of the child, but what about the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People? It's a fascinating document, and there's various responsibilities to it and mobilizations around them. Is this a reference point in our work? If not, why not? I speak as someone with enormous economic, social, political, and cultural privilege. For me, transformative learning is about supporting what Audrey Bryan has called a pedagogy of implication. Drawing an analogy from Su Ming Ku of solidarity as a rope, I ask, how can we each follow the threads that will help unknot the systems that are maintaining inequalities, including our own privilege? There are knots only we can untie, and we must do so. Then we can braid into and create and transform ways of relating. Possibly we'll encounter new knots. We will do our unknotting and braiding differently from different contexts with different aims. We need multiple approaches We will disagree and debate and not fully understand, but what we cannot have is multiple versions of the same ways of relating that got us into the systems that are maintaining our inequalities today. As Chief Kui insisted yesterday, we can exist in different ways on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think that there was a lot to think about, and I really would like to thank you about the provocations and inviting, of course, all the participants now to really be ready. Either you can definitely put your points on the chat, but please prepare yourselves for participating in this fishbowl. But before I'm inviting the others to join, I'm really happy to invite the third colleague, Manish Jain, who is really bringing very interesting perspectives for these discussions, because Manish is really deeply committed to generating in our diverse local knowledge systems, cultural imaginations, and intercultural dialogue. And I think that exactly the thing what you can really bring in is this deschooling, where you have amazing experiences all over the world, and perhaps you could exactly, starting with that, I think that it might be good to reflect. It might be that you thought that already, but anyway, I think it could be good to take that point of view on that. So very welcome, Manish, and over to you.
Thank you so much. So good to be here with everyone today. Let me, since our task today is to provide some provocations, let me jump into it. So I'll start with a little saying, which is, the white man who brought the pencil also brought the eraser. And I think that this is the starting point to try to understand where our movement around deschooling comes from. There's a few different elements of that I would like to reflect on in relation to that saying. One is that we see that the schooling system in India and many countries of the South is generating a whole class of failures, quote unquote failures. In Delhi, the capital of India, more than 50% youth are failed in class 9 and have no hope or no direction of where to go. And so, and this, I think, is a human rights violation to label innocent children as failures. The second thing is that our community knowledge and languages have been made invisible. And much of the ways of dealing with specificity of place and the local problems that we have, many options get wiped out when we lose that. The third thing I would want to say is we've been confused with a narrative that says competition and consumerism is equivalent to happiness. And so our own narratives of what is happiness, we always like to refer to Bhutan for the need to, again, emphasize the need for new paradigms around happiness. But this is three things, at least, that I think drive the need for transformative education. I think we have started 10 years ago alternative university called Swaraj University, and I just want to share that as a very practical thing. It's one of the first self-designed universities, self-designed learning, and in there's several aspects. One is, I think, the idea of democratic decision making. So the learners come to our campus, they get to decide on their own learning programs. They get to work on how the campus should be run. They make decisions about what kind of guest faculty they would like to involve. They run, the canteen. So lots of things in terms of practical democratic decision making. So it's not enough to talk about democracy, but really dealing with that and different ways of practicing it is core. The second is, in that, of course, as we practice, we come across conflict. So one of the things we really talk about is not conflict management, but more talking about conflict as a gift. Conflict as a way to understand our own shadows, our trauma, our fears, our insecurities, and a way to really heal ourselves from much of the damage that modern institutions oftentimes bring into our lives. The third thing is that focus on really reclaiming sustainable skills. So practical skills like how do we grow our own food? How do we make our own clothes? How do we build much more sustainable housing? with local materials? What kinds of lifestyle questions? What is a meaningful life? What is our connection to local place? These are things that we try to explore really. And really people come out with a lot of confidence in these skills, and they really develop them in terms of really connecting back to local community knowledge around these areas, whether it's in terms of healing, whether it's in terms of farming techniques, connecting to the forest. And a lot of for example, one of the things that's really come out of this is a very large movement on really reclaiming and regenerating native species in the forests, local seed varieties, and even trying to look at reclaiming many local forms of food, like we're connected with the slow food movement, for example. And the fourth thing I think, which is most critical, is rebuilding the sense of community. And so we talk about a lot the exponential power of trust, that when you have community and you have trust, things that look overwhelming or unachievable all of a sudden become possible. And I think what we try to do is move beyond. There's a lot of the dominant narrative, again, is around individual behavior change. And what we're trying to talk about is that real systemic change will come when we actually start to rebuild healthy communities, healthy sense of collaboration in the communities. And so what I would just like to say is we are supporting also, we have something called the Ecoversities Alliance, which is working with communities to rebuild their own local ecoversities, their own local community universities, which start from their own local knowledge. We always we like to refer to our grandmothers as our first faculty, and Grandmothers University. And last thing, I just wanted to say something about the SDGs, is that there's a need to, understand, I think transformative education can help us understand the big picture, what we call big picture activism sometimes. And sometimes I think we need to understand that the model of development and growth and progress that is that's situated in actually has to be relooked at. So many of you might know in Europe, the degrowth movement, for example. There's similar things in India and Latin America. And I think this whole idea of unlimited economic growth has to be challenged. And one of the things that we noticed is that with this model, about $130 billion goes every year in development aid from the global north to the south. But about $2.2 trillion goes the other way, from the south to the north. And about $152 trillion had gone in the last 60 years from the global south into the north. And this model is not at all addressed in the SDGs, but needs to be really looked at seriously. So I think the last thing is that, hopefully we can get transformative education takes us in a place where we can hopefully look more at the roots of the crises that are facing us and not just try to deal with symptoms of it. Thank you so much.
I was on mute. Yeah, thank you, Manish. Very, very, very relevant points. Absolutely great points, all of you. I really appreciate your comments, and I'm really happy that I see at least Katarina who would like to now to come and comment. So over to you, Katarina. You are unmuted. Put your microphone.
Sorry, I was too fast because I wanted to react immediately. Thank you for giving me the floor. And indeed, you managed, all provocateurs really managed to provoke interesting thoughts and dilemmas and questions. And I simply couldn't decide which one to tackle and to engage with. So I've summarized by reflecting two moments and maybe continuing the discussion of two main problems or dilemmas that we had in dealing with the problems that your great speakers announced. And let me start first with the one, I was really touched by what Manish said because I'm also researching in this, global architecture of financial and economic power relationships and so on. And this is something that has to be changed. I mean, all the Agenda 2030 is nothing. It's just lip service if we don't address these things. But the question is related also to what Robbie started. So we talk about transformation, and we agree that it's necessary to change us and ourselves. I mean, taking others as an object of our change is not the way. But how can we then work with what a neoliberal approach is imposing on us? And that's, this modern, or let's say more postmodern philosophy, like, oh, we have to change ourselves and work on yourself. And, they keep us busy with our own responsibility. For example, recycling. I'm currently at the moment in Germany, and there's some obsession with recycling. So, and people are so busy with that and with the healthy lifestyles, and so on. So they don't have even time to reflect or rethink the global financial architecture that people were talking, your speakers were talking about. So on the one hand, yes, we need to work on ourselves, but how to avoid this trap of neoliberal approach, like keep being busy with yourself and changing yourself and your own responsibility. Let me add one example to those that Manish brought. It's about, of course, air pollution, CO2, and so on. And there is now intensive discussion in highly industrialized countries about, well, we shouldn't drive the car, so it's more about bicycles and so on. Of course, it's kind of a luxury, and you can think about it if you have the infrastructure and everything else. But still, that's the question, important question. At the same time, we know that the whole amount of CO2 and all the everything what the cars producing, all cars in the world produce as much as 15 big ships. Those big ships that carry airplanes, warplanes, or kill fishes in tons and so on. So they keep us really busy with this, oh, we should drive bicycles and not the car, but we are not thinking about how to change the system that allows 15 ships, big ocean ships, to destroy the atmosphere. So this is the first big dilemma about this individual responsibility, transforming ourselves and changing the world. And the other one was provoked by Robbie's thoughts on science. And this is again a kind of postmodernist trap, I would say. On one hand, we know that we need to question big narratives. And for example, indigenous aspect, I mean, without questioning the narrative, some historical narratives, we would never come up to finally appreciate indigenous culture, indigenous knowledge, and so on. At the same time, we live in a postmodern world of fake news and alternative facts and questioning the science, and everyone has opinion, even if he or she doesn't have any facts about anything. So we question science so far that we see the situation with vaccination and with the whole COVID and all the conspiracy theories. So we need some kind of a guidelines. How do we combine, and that's a dilemma that I would like to add to our discussion, how to combine need to question science and the big narratives and so on, and at the same time having some, not the authorities, but some guiding values, being the scientific base, but also some universal values. Everyone has the right to have his or her own value and the right to defend it. So are we losing the ground for universal values? So in a way, the answer is of course not black and white, but these are two dilemmas that I was inspired by all your speakers, and I would like to propose for the further discussion. Thank you for giving me the floor. Unmute.
Classical mistake. Perhaps I will give the floor now for any of Robbie, Karen, or Manish you would like to exactly reply back to all of you or any of you in the fishbowl, and then I'm inviting the new faces to come and you to leave, if you don't mind. But any of you quick reaction on any of the colleagues' point what was mentioned. Just raise your hand who would like to take the floor. Robbie, you looks like.
Can I pause? I just need to answer.
Well, we can't hear you very well now.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, the microphone helps. Yes,
Yes.
that's good.
Yes. So just quickly, I agree with Katerina. The whole idea of being busy. The problem with busy is not an active sort of busy. It's busy bees without reflect. And I think that was what Karen was saying. It's really important that we are active. That there's an active form of learning and engagement that's different from being busy. Okay, and unless we know why we recycle, unless we know that this is part of the bigger thing, so that's part of that bigger picture understanding that you talk about, that when you start to say that we don't just want to shoot science, and I'm not saying I'm a scientist, I still believe in the science, but at the same time we need to contextualize, and this I think is the key word around contextualizing knowledge, contextualizing action, but that itself is something that takes time, it's learned, it's developed, because as I said, part of that is an appreciation that, and again, this is what Manish was saying, often schooling prepares us to be one mold. There's one mold of what we need to look like at the end of school to pass. Okay, but what we recognize is that each individual should be able to have the capacity to develop an awareness of your own values, an awareness that we might have been shaped by our religion, being Catholic in the Philippines, might have been shaped by, I was born during the martial law time in the Philippines, and so the kind of education that I had was an education in the streets, not education in the classroom. So an awareness of that, it doesn't happen naturally. It only happens often when I am confronted by other issues. For example, the example I was going to give earlier was, I am a very passionate theater person, and I tried to say participatory education is so important, active learning is so important, until I came across a community where I tried to play games to start off an energetic activity, and at the end of the game, one of the participants came to me with a notebook and a pen and say, when do we start learning? And I said, we already have. And then I realized, wait a minute, he has been so schooled that for him, learning was about something, the piece of paper and the pen. So after that, I said, let's wait a moment. I wanted you to be able to recall the game. The game was about identifying environmental activities that they did for them locally. And so I wrote each activity on the blackboard, and it was still a blackboard, a chalkboard then. And he was busy copying each and everything that they did. And I said, these are the activities that we will begin to recognize that you already are doing something about the environment. But we need to be able to deal with the issue, because they're sugar workers in the Philippines. The plantations were being converted to prawn farms, which again would create a different set of environmental problems while trying to solve an economic problem. And so I said, this is what we will talk about. I'm not here to tell you how you can take care of the environment, because you already are doing that. I'm here to be able to explain to you the other relationships. And this is the whole idea of being, linking the local and the global. There's no such thing as a very local problem, because all problems now have global dimensions. And I think that's very important. So in the end of that, he comes back to me, notebook, copied everything on the blackboard. And he said, sir, we have started to learn. And so for me, I was humbled to realize, here I am trying to modify the kind of learning, active learning and activities and fun and all that, without recognizing that I am also imposing something on them. So how do we bridge the gap? How do we bridge that kind of, yes, we want this kind of learning, but we need to recognize where people are at. And that's what I say when I started, that we are also being transformed. Our very ideas of what we think is transformative learning is being transformed. And the only way that this can be true is if we are also open to being able to listen to what is happening. And again, as Sonia earlier said, I think part of what Sonia gave in the earlier activity is sometimes silence and pausing are actually active things that we need to do. There's such thing as an active pause, when we need to start to stop this busyness, look at ourselves sometimes in the mirror, not just to reflect and admire ourselves, but to look at ourselves critically and be able to use that as a basis for saying, what are my assumptions? Where am I coming from? And how do I begin to engage more effectively in this transformative process? So not busyness, active reflection might be the way to go.
Thanks, Robbie. Absolutely great. Did I see that Frank, you wanted to come in? Please do so.
Thanks very much, really, and thanks everybody. There's so much to, so much in this conversation, so much to, I've just kind of written pages and pages of piece of paper here in front of me. But yeah, look, thank you so much, so stimulating. I guess I kind of wanted to pick up a point that a few people have touched on, and maybe to kind of, from Katarina's intervention, to maybe follow on from that. Just that idea that education is societal, that it's social, that, the work of civil society is societal. And I suppose thinking about that involves, whether we call them alliances or partnerships or conversations, whatever we call them. But to some extent, it involves having to talk to and having to engage with people who we don't want to talk to. And I think the other side of it is we need to think about humility. I think Robbie really touched on this really, in those last remarks really strongly, that we do not have the right answers. And I think that includes the global citizenship education community. There's always, I have to say, in these conferences, there's always a certain point at which I start to get really uncomfortable. And usually I don't say anything. So it's a bit odd to me in this fishbowl at this moment, which is the point where it can feel like we're starting to almost make certain things sacred, and maybe growing up in a religious country, I have a bit of an aversion to the sacred. And so I just think that that's something we need to be really careful of. So maybe again, Katarina was presenting a dilemma, so I'll present another dilemma, which is between that need for dialogue, societal action, engagement, and on the other hand, values, and maybe, thinking of or presenting our values as being in some way sacred. So there is some kind of a dilemma there, and I don't know or see kind of ways through. The only way I can see is that one of the things I think that this community does really, really well is convening conversation, convening is the wrong word, gathering for conversations where differences and disagreements can be put on the table and can be put on the table in an open and fruitful way. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Great.
Hello.
Yeah. So anyone who would like to join?
I just would like to say little things. Everybody, very important things that's stimulating everyone's and very good ideas. I would like to say thank you. But my concern is while we talk on these issues, let's start to imagine in how many of we, when we are living at our home, think about our environments. How many people, when they are driving their car or buses or cycle, the things to about the environment, the resources? How many of our leaders, when they are sitting or on their chair, at their responsible chair, in their responsible chair as a leaders or ministers or the presidents or prime minister, how many of this in the world, they think about their environment within 24 hours, whether they think at least 2 minutes, 1 minute or nothing? How many of we thinks about it? So our education should, pursue the people, convince our children, they have to think about their environment, the resources in their lives. At least when they are, searching job, or when they get the job, or when they are working, when they are at school, when they grow up and they became the leaders, we have to train them, and we must have to develop ethical values. In our education systems, like in my countries, our children's missing, losing the ethical values. What is the ethics where they are living? What is the relationship with the resources? Like our children, what is the relationship with the resources? How they grow up? We are missing these areas, So the ethical values should be, teach, should we incorporate or start to in our school, or like in our home, or maybe any areas, like in a political parties, or everybody's to tackle these issues. Okay, I like everything. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your comment. And exactly, perhaps I could reflect here, because I just came from the European Parliament Cultural Committee. They were the public hearing, and exactly, that was really interesting. I was talking about the work what the Bridge 47 has done, and there were other presenters as well, and it was really a little bit weird situation, because the members of the European Parliament, they were really talking and very keen on that, what they can do to promote about the European values, European programs. So it was really, first of all, very Eurocentric. And secondly, it was exactly existing and somehow keeping about the structures what we are having at the moment. So practically meaning that they would like to continue the business as usual. And I think that's really is these channels, because they are the victim of the system as well. So they are not, and all of us, I think we definitely need to reflect and look to the mirror, like Robbie said, and really reflecting that what we do in everyday life at the moment. And I needed to correct a little bit on their talks when they were talking about the European values, but there doesn't really exist any European values. They are universal values. We have the human rights in this planet, and then we have the compulsory role to really take account. We have every single European has a role to play, and really the responsibility to think about the global aspect as well. And indeed, we might need to some kind of political frames, or we might need the resources on there, but it's not alone the solution. We need to think about out of the box, and we need to really think about the different ways of working, because we can't repeat anymore about this existing system what we're having at the moment. Sorry, it won't really, it's absolutely, it's too slow, it's very selfish, and exactly, it's just exactly promoting about some people's interest, not about the general interest, and not really taking account about that how we are really having everyone on board, and really thinking about, let's use about this slogan, leave no one behind. But I think that as words, it really resonates. But I think that definitely we need to go on those places, because those are really the great opportunities to challenge. But it doesn't really mean that it's enough that we are using about the existing channels, but we need to do some kind of revolution in parallel. Because without that, we can't really solve all the problems, and the clock is ticking, unfortunately. And still, I really believe that we can really build this optimistic whatever tsunami coming and making the change. But I think that definitely, of course, the realities are what we know. But I think that we need to really operate in many levels at the same time. But I just wanted to share that with you, because I just came from there, and by timing, of course, but I'm sorry I couldn't prioritize about the Bridge 47 event what I wanted, but I think it was really worth of using the time as well to challenge with those who are we are not always talking, and I think that's always is a good point to keep in mind. Okay, anyone else who would like to be the next one, please join the Fishbowl. You're most welcome to join. Any of you who would like to continue about this discussion so far, what we have started. I see a couple of videos on. Does it mean that you would like to jump in?
Yeah.
In meanwhile, Katarina, please go ahead. And then the next one, please jump in after Katarina.
I'm just using the opportunity that the others are still thinking, so otherwise I wouldn't. But it's so interesting, this discussion, and especially I like the dilemmas, the problems, the issues that we are kind of collecting and then discussing, because I think that's the way really to go. And I like the expression, I think Frank used it, about these sacred cows. And this is another one that I would like to add. And it has to do with the universal values that you really mentioned. There is, especially in education now, a very popular term of safe spaces for learning. And also culture is also a kind of, well, sacred cow. In what sense? Well, again, a dilemma. On one hand, we talk a lot about contextualizing education in terms of culture, about the importance of culture, respect of culture. And again, I believe this respect for indigenous culture that was lacking so much. They have a credit that we learned so much about the need to respect the culture. But now we have an opposite, like cultural practices, or some of cultural practices became more important than universal values. And again, I see the gap, and I have a lot of conflict with the people, although, for example, we believe in transformative learning and so on, but like, don't touch the culture. And there is a point where I wonder, when is the culture a sacred cow? And why are we not allowed to discuss some of cultural practices that are conflicting the universal values? Of course, universal values are, well, they are a construct, of course, but I believe after a few thousand years, we can talk about them as an achievement of our civilization. Let me just mention, in order to be clear, for example, I think about some cultural practices that are very harmful for women. And sometimes it's connected to the religion, sometimes not, but they are directly opposing universal values. And I see this kind of a fear of talking about these practices, even talking about that, because that's a culture and we should respect and leave it there. I think without engaging in a critical dialogue about these kind of things, we would never achieve at least a common understanding of universal human values. And now I see the similar tendencies in the safe spaces in learning. And that's very much connected to our topic of transformative learning, because in transformative learning, we need the kind of, well, we can call it disorienting dilemma, as Jack Mezirow did, or trigger event, or cognitive dissonance. But there is a need for some discomfort that would move us. At least realizing that, oh, this nice surrounding and nature that I'm enjoying here at my small place, well, that's not like that around the world. There is a conflict there, and we need to do something against the climate change and for the environment in other continents and so on. So, but if we keep, insisting on safe spaces in terms like, this is the space where you will not meet confronting opinion, other opinion, people who think differently, and so on, I think that's a problem. That's a problem. If we want transformative learning, we need, as Mezirow said, we need to be comfortable with some level of discomfort in order to start the transformation process. And that's what, in the communication with the people about safe spaces, that would be my suggestion. Let's go for trust, openness, respect, dialogue, but we need to have a dialogue engagement about different ideas and approaches, and measure them. I don't mean statistically measure, of course, but measure them according to the universal value, at least those that we did agree until now.
That's great. Manish, you put very, very good point on the chat box. Would you like to open that a bit more about the brave spaces?
Yes, so I totally agree with you, Katarina, and also Frank, what you said. I just tie this to when we use the term brave spaces. So one is, there's there is a need, I think, urgent need today, and to how do we talk with our quote unquote enemies is the question, and are they really enemies as they've been framed? But I think this is one of the fundamental things that. Because the politics of divisiveness is so strong right now, the identity politics, while it has its place, it can also become very paralyzing and almost destructive after a certain point, what we've witnessed, to creating a deeper intercultural dialogue. So I think that, the imagination is that. At the same time, I think we don't want to lose this notion that there is a lot of trauma, but how we, that people, whether they're black or white or brown or any other color or race, that, or gender wise, that this trauma is real, and we must, but I think getting stuck on that would also not help us to get out of the traps that we're in, but to somehow recognize and heal it is also necessary, but also inviting people. And in this place, I think there's a need for people who are bridge people, who are able to bridge these conversations and anchor them. And that requires, as I said earlier, trust to be built. And that maybe that also means, we come out of, one of the things we encourage people is, a lot of our learners coming out of their own comfort zones in terms of the place. So if you really want to engage with indigenous communities, we need to actually go and, we spend weeks on end with them, staying with them, living with them, or we go into urban, slum areas and stay with communities there. And I think that, to expect all of this to happen in the nice, in our organization or in our hotel or in our conference hall, this kind of thing is I think we can learn it doesn't really work. And so a lot of the ways we've constructed space also, I think transformative education really challenged that, and maybe in the languages we use for that, also coming out of using English. We do one thing I just wanted to briefly share, something called the cycle Yatra, bicycle pilgrimage. We take our learners for 1 week. It's an unlearning process. 1 week without any money, without any food, without any plan, on bicycles into rural communities. And the idea is to strip away a lot of our own comfort and power, and actually engage with communities in a very different way, where we're vulnerable. And unless we invite this vulnerability in whatever we're doing, I don't think that we can get to the brave spaces. So.
Very, very good example. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Who would like to be the next? Who would like to jump in? It's really a great place, and I think there's really a lot of opportunities where to just take. There's so many ideas in the air. So anyone who would like to now take the floor, or any of you would like to raise what you wrote to the chat box. Ricarda, you looks like that you would like to join.
Karen just unmuted herself.
Oh, okay.
Happy to just jump in quickly, because I think it's a really good point that you raised, Katerina, but I totally appreciate that there's the sense that there's certain conversations you can't have. And that's really important to put on the table. At the same time, I just have to be honest that coming over from Canada to Europe, I'm shocked by some of the quite unsafe practices that I see in learning spaces, and a lack of kind of understanding of culturally responsive pedagogy. And that doesn't mean that you can't have difficult discussions, or that you can't open up, but it's understanding, as you and I agree, that the spaces of learning themselves are reflective of the dominant society and have been sources of trauma for lots of different people. And so I find it, I know sometimes I get told I'm being too politically correct, or I'm a cancel culture, I'm this and that. And what I like to say is I'm trying to listen to somebody who's experiencing an injustice that I might be unwittingly participating in, because I'm not perfect, and this could be something. So instead of calling me a snowflake, maybe thinking of it as like being responsive is another approach. I think we're agreeing about the same thing. I'm just kind of adding another way of looking at it. Thanks.
That's great. I see Lars. You looks like that you would like to jump in. So welcome.
Thank you, really. I was getting warmed up in the chat a little bit. You know, it's super insightful, the conversation, and it's really great to hear the different challenges or the different arguments. And I think we're funny enough and not funny enough, we're pretty much all on the same page. That's why we're here, I think. And that's why I thought kind of I post something a little more maybe backward looking into the chat and saying that the biggest challenge that I see, or the experience also in the Mel Foundation, 30 years of pretty much transformative education with young people, is that it does not fit in a curriculum. And unless you can fit it into a curriculum, it will not get valued, or it will not get recognized as a valuable form of formation. And I'm not saying educational pedagogy as formation, hence does not get the credits, etc., etc., etc. So kind of going back to Robbie's point earlier, which I found really, really powerful, that story you told, that is, you know, it's difficult to actually, I mean, there's pathways that in education that we can take, but we never know where we get at if we embark on a transformative journey, because that means we change, the course changes, people change, and we don't know where we end up. So I think that is the biggest challenge in actually making transformative education mainstream, because we just don't know where we're going to land. We may have a notion in a sense, but is that enough kind of to actually make the case for it? I think it's powerful, but you know, in terms of the focus or the perspective that schooling brings us, you know, making people fit for society, fit for the job, etc. There is a lot of skills that transformative education it touches upon it, but it does not specify you for A, B, C, D necessarily kind of as it is required by a job profile. And that is kind of the biggest tension I'm seeing, kind of where somebody said it, I forgot who it was, kind of we're squeezing education in a box, human development in a box, as it's, you know, kind of we're producing products, or we're forming products rather than producing creativity and human beings and thinking beings.
That's very true, and exactly. I think that honestly we are afraid about the future in many ways. So it's really that we are so used to exactly think about it. Okay, we know what's coming on next week or the next year. So we are planning the things so that we can really be in the safe space somehow. Exactly. It's a little bit afraidness of the, let's say, surprises, and then we are not really ready to tackle about those changes which is happening in our lives. And I think there's a fear behind or not there in the end. And that's I think that how could we really help, and then really talking to myself as well here, that how could we really jump and without knowing that where we are landing. And I think that's really is the key point, that how could we really encourage about this curiosity and then really observing and then going and without any filled agenda which we know already beforehand. I think that's super interesting. Yeah. But now we have the Gertrude. Welcome.
Hi there.
Over to
How are you? Actually, to be honest with you, so many thoughts have come into my mind, even in the last 5 minutes, that I now don't know what I want to say.
Welcome to club.
There's so many different things that I want to say. I mean, first of all, apologies, because work-wise and because of time zones, I actually missed most of this, but I came in fortunately for the conversation here towards the last 10 minutes, and everything is so kind of stimulating this whole week that I can't get my thoughts together, but that's okay. I kind of lots of things. What am I saying? Right. What Manish, and I think the last person who was speaking there, who are you gone to? Oh yeah, Lars was talking about as well. I suppose I'm working myself and integrating development and global citizenship education into the curriculum, across the university where I work, University College Cork in Ireland. And I work a lot with the staff and to some extent with students, but more with staff really. And the staff who came to this Praxis project, which we're calling it this year, which is the first time we're really running it properly, sort of thing, and we piloted it last year. But they're very receptive. But they also at the last session, and it's the most wonderful process because you're kind of getting across the idea that this is there's 30 staff from different disciplines, and you're kind of trying to get across the idea that this is a process of learning. And several of them were saying the last time we met, they actually felt a panic, literally a panic at the idea of what I was calling slow learning, a bit like slow cooking, that they were actually saying, they didn't know what to do. And I was saying to them, I'm not telling you what this is or what the definition is. This is a process of you uncovering what it, sort of trying to bring in the experience of I suppose, everything we've learned in the sector and being aware of that, but then for people to actually, this is for us collectively to be saying, it's not, I'm not coming in with this formula saying this is what it is. I'm offering different perspectives and ideas, and I remember them having a quite a nice, interesting conversation the last time about this kind of panic. And then I went to another group where there's one particular discipline. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, actually, but it was theatre studies, and the whole discipline are going to take this on. It's wonderful, and because it's quite a small place, it's quite a small number of staff in this department. There's only 6 of them, and they're all really interested. And they're obviously, because they're drama teachers, they're very creative and open and really interested in this kind of approaches and stuff. And they were saying to me, they were just, again, they didn't use the word panic, but they said, tell us what to do. And it's almost like part of it is that people just don't have time. And like Lara said a while ago, unless it's in the curriculum, and that whole thing of trying to integrate into the curriculum, it's not simple because, and there's a lot of learning that has to happen in between spaces. But it's something Manish and Lars were saying there about, we have become programmed and institutionalized, so programmed to learn in a certain way that it actually can't be okay to just say, I haven't a clue what you're talking about, or I can't process my ideas in my head because, whatever, or that I don't know, or that we're just having a conversation, or how do I feel about that? So what I've begun to do in small groups as well is with the staff thing, because we've worked in groups, but also individual conversations. So for example, I'm working now at the moment with the Sustainable Development Officer, because UCC has very good work around the Green Campus, but there is actually very little around other things beyond the environmental. And we're trying to talk to one another about how that would happen. But we're not, people can't talk without a PowerPoint these days. We're actually having a conversation and bringing other people into the conversation. So it's actually a conversation, and it's, you're actually able to talk properly to somebody without this kind of this point, that point, that point, that point, blah, blah, blah. We're all going around talking as if we're a PowerPoint, and we're all looking, it's even worse these days because we're all boxes, in front of us, and then there's a PowerPoint on top of the box. So that's why it's lovely to have this conversation here, because I kind of feel that there's an honesty about it and a kind of, an authenticity or something that we can actually say, I'm totally confused here. And then the other thing I've been learning, and I'll stop on this, there's a million things I'd like to say, but just something a while ago about people who might have, radically different ideas and are coming from a different place. I've been in a fortunate situation to have been able to work with students over the last few years where, for a variety of reasons, there are quite radical differences of perspective in the classroom. And the only thing one of the main learnings that all I can say, and it seems like obvious, but actually taking the conversations, a bit like you were saying, Manish, about cycling or whatever, but not even necessarily that, but taking the conversations, long conversations and dialogues away from the formal situation where we're learning whatever, but actually just a real conversation in a non-confrontational way, and really, really hearing and listening and understanding where people's perspectives have come from. In my opinion, it's the only thing that has really worked in a meaningful way. Long conversations with people, but that's very slow, which is fine too. Slow is good. Anyway, I'll stop talking now, but there's so many things out there. It's a fantastic conversation. I wish I had been here for the whole thing.
Thanks a lot on that. We still have a couple of more minutes to go, and I really would like to invite now if there's someone who hasn't really spoken yet. So that's you're most welcome to join first. Any of you who would like to take the floor? Open your mic and put your video on.
Yes, I would like to say something.
Go ahead.
Very inspired by what Manish is saying, and remembering my wonderful days in Udaipur. Still have not visited your university, but would love to, Manish. But you were talking about spending 1 week without any money, any etc. And that made me remember that was exactly what we tried to do when I was 18 years old. I spent 6 months in a Danish high school, and I think that the true understanding of global issues from camping out in a Swedish forest that had recently been full of manure, and we didn't see that because we set up the tent in the night. But when we woke up to the rain and to the fresh manure, we couldn't light a fire, so we couldn't get any porridge. And we spent 4 or 5 days in the road, and talking about how the global level of living was, and that ours should be exactly the same in that week. My point for this story is simply learning does not really come through the words. It comes through the heart and through the emotions. We think that the world is governed by words and by reason, but it is governed more by the hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Very, very good point. Very good point. One more comment, and again, I'm inviting if there's anyone who hasn't really spoken yet, who would like to take the floor. So first those. Any of you would like to take the floor? Because what I would like to do now is that perhaps I could invite Robbie and Manish and Karen. Perhaps you could take what exactly most resonates you, or inspired you, or challenge you, or anything you would like to point out. That would be great, because I forgot to say in the beginning that exactly we are also collecting, like in many other sessions as well, we are having the graphic recorder, harvesting a little bit, putting that in a visual format. So anything what you really what's up to your mind when you have heard about this? Absolutely valid points, very, very rich discussions. So Karen, perhaps you would like to start.
Gosh, yeah. And there's like overlapping conferences and we're all like buzzing. I think it's the buzzing together that's probably the thing I'm taking away right now. And I agree with Frank that it's really important that one thing we do really well in this network is put ourselves together and have some difficult conversations. And so I really hope that, you know, I think it was nice having this discussion about like cancel culture and people feeling like culture is a sacred cow. And at the same time, I mean, my provocation was about also putting those conversations to the side sometimes and thinking about how we actually unwittingly do participate in these kinds of conversations, because it's something that worries me. I hear from people, certainly in Manchester, and I've heard it when I lived in Finland, and obviously back home we have a big problem with it too, like that experience a lot of racism in these spaces, right? So we do, I know all of us care about that. So we need to have these difficult conversations, and we also have to be constantly reflecting on ourselves and what practices, and maybe people are trying out certain practices. Like I personally hate that notion of safe space. It's an impossibility. When I'm teaching about it, I say as safe as possible, because actually I do want it. I do want my learning space to be as safe as possible. I have a commitment to that. right? But at the same time, yeah, we can silence certain discussions, but sometimes we need to as well. So that's what I'm thinking about, and I really appreciate the provocations back to my provocation.
Great, thanks a lot, Karen. Manish, well, what's on your mind on the top?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this question of, the shifting the larger global economy, global juggernaut, whatever you would like to call it, is something that we are constantly engaged with. I think there are many levels to look at, and one is, I think, really our more fundamental idea of power and wealth, actually, I think, is what I would want to invite us to look at. Where do we see power? How do we understand power? And also, how do we understand wealth? Wealth, again, despite, I guess now, 40 plus years of people saying GDP is not the measure of development, it's still the dominant indicator and marker for economies. Even we see that today. So I think that, and I think in the face of that, I would really want to think about and share about how do we, rebuild our local economies. I think that is the fundamental starting point, and that local community and local economy, I would think is something in there. At least, a few things that we've explored with our learners is really around, this questioning one of where whatever I'm using, where is it coming from, and where does it go, are two fundamental questions, I think, and who and how far away is it coming from, who's making it. There is I think a healthy shift towards more of a maker culture, but again, how do we really build that up and link it to economy? And the second, I think, thing is how do we understand our local resources differently? There's a very famous Native American saying, what do people call your local resources? We call our relatives. And so even how we see resources or understand them, but I think, again, the schooled mind limits sometimes, again, like I mentioned, the grandmother, I see so many people in India who don't have degrees, but who are fantastic, knowledge and wisdom keepers, knowledge holders, wisdom keepers. So how can they be, brought back into this conversation, I think is really important. And how do we go to them, step out of the walls of the classroom and go to those people is a second thing. And, and so in our university, we have more than 1,000 faculty, and they are people without, majority of them are without any degrees. They're not PhD holders, but they are actually really people who are building alternatives and creating a different kind of local economy and keeping it alive. And the third thing I think is just in that, there are many dimensions, but just of time, I think is most important is the scarcity mindset that we are all conditioned with. One of the things we really play, when we look at a lot of the ways we play games, the games that we play, and majority of schools across the world still are invested in competitive games, win-lose kinds of games. And, creating and something as simple, if we look at something as simple as musical chairs, which has become in a sense a global game, right? Global urban game. What does it teach you? Scarcity of mindset. You can kick and claw your way to get that one chair in the world. And I think that's the basis for then how this whole global system gets held up. And so how do we step out of that, start to reclaim play in a different way, reclaim, we talked about culture. I think for me, the real essence of culture, any culture around the world, is gift culture. How does it create more sharing, more caring, more trust, more kindness, more love, and more connection, the connection with the human and the non-human world. So I would just like to end with just inviting us to also take this conversation beyond the anthropocentric lens and invite also other other kinds of perspectives and of knowledge and understanding into going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Manish. And then Robbie, the most urgent point in your mind, what you really will take with you?
I, I I guess the most urgent point in my mind. I think the conversation just reminded me. One of my students, after finishing a course, I teach a course called Learning and Participation in Development, and one of my students, after so many years, emailed me back to say, "Robbie, now I know what you were trying to do," because often I think the problem is people don't realize why we need to transform education. If they see that certification, accreditation, so what's the problem? And I think that's where we need to begin. I think people need to be able to share what is the problem of education, and that's why we need to transform it. Unless they start to recognize what the problem is and also start to own that, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I know the answer, that I have been part of an education system that also has promoted this kind of thinking. So unless we start to recognize what the problem is and our students recognize what the problem is, then we cannot begin to really unravel why we are trying to transform education in the first place. And that recognition is very much what Freire talks about, because it's about conscientization and being able to recognize that that is the problem, whether it's the banking system of education, whether it's the job focus, that learning is only for a job. Then people start to recognize and become part of looking at solutions. And the other thing, I guess, in the conversation we've had on the side is I don't think people who have developed curriculum before have all bad intentions. They also wanted to transform education, but I think what they've been trying to do is it might have worked for a kind of economy that was about factory workers, that was a particular kind of world. And I think what we have now is a world that we're actually not sure, because it's so rapidly changing. And so that's why I think we need to be more open to such conversations, because as Paulo Freire also says, we need to create the road by walking. And I think that's in essence of what we're trying to do, that the very transformative process is happening while we are doing it, which is scary. Okay, but part of that is the confidence that because we are traveling together, then we will keep walking. And thank you for sharing this journey.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, all of you. It was really, really amazing story. Unfortunately, this time, this event is really now over. Not really over. We are going to have the reception side, but anyway, these pieces of the program is over so far. And of course, this is not really the over of the whole network, and not at all. So this is just for the one milestone where we are at the moment. And definitely we will come together and we will continue these discussions. So let's really continue about this debating and confronting the ideas, really raising the right questions, which we just now started. I think that's really is the beauty of the network. And just to practically think about that, you will see now about this picture, the graphic which has been collected about this session. We are going to share with you all the others what has happened during these 3 days. So there will be really some kind of summary for you. And what I'm really inviting you to is to take your time and reflect which came out from there. So that is the tool for us to really use all the material what has been produced in these events, and we will let you know how you will get those, and all the sessions being recorded, etc. So we can really reflect back on that, which is great, because that is as a part of our learning as well. So unfortunately, this is now the final event, but I really would like to thank you, all of you, on your contributions, or in whatever role you have been, either you as facilitators or speakers or participants, or whatever role. All your inputs has been extremely valid on that, and this is the common journey, like we have said several times, and because this is the journey, we don't really know what is the final result. And that's really is the beauty of the process as well. But definitely, I'm really inviting all of us to use the Bridge 47 network also for the future occasions and places to come together. And it's up to us to use our imagination and really finding what could be the next steps, what we want to like to do. So thanks a lot for all of your contributions. Special thanks, of course, for the team, Bridge 47 team, who has really make all of this happens. Absolutely great, great work in many ways, like always, but especially now when we needed to do that in this digital format. We would love to see each of you in a physical way, and definitely I really believe that we can do that in one day again. But when we have this technology, and let's use it in the right way, and let's use that, and let's come together and meet again. So thanks a lot for the team on that work. Thanks a lot for all the other colleagues out of the Bridge 47 team, Graphic Harvest, those who helped us in technically to make it happen. Thanks a lot for your contributions. Without you, we couldn't really make that like it was. Okay, we supposed to have the 5 minutes break, and I think we need to do that, because what is happening now after this session is that I would like to invite you for toasting, taking your class of whatever you would like to put to that. And I would like to invite you to come back in 5 minutes so that we can celebrate a little bit on this journey, what we have done in the Bridge 47 project. But let's take 4 minutes break now, so you have a time to go and take whatever you would like to put your hand when we are toasting. So we will come back in 4 minutes. Please be on time. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.